Hello, it's the Great Canadian Beggar here, coming to you with another Alberta provincial election forecast. So, just to strongly emphasize here, the next Alberta election is in May. I think it's the end of May. So we are quite far away from it. So don't take this result too seriously yet. A lot can happen in about 7 months. But I think it is still worth publishing results this far out because I realized here I have just listed this as Jason Kenny. This is actually Danielle Smith. I apologize. It is worth doing a forecast here because a lot of the narrative around Smith's leadership win is pretty dumb. So let's just get off. So since the last time I did this forecast, and I realized too, I have written 2020 here, that should be 2023. Once again, apologies. Since the last update to this, I really was the first update. I've done one major change to how I'm presenting this. I've changed this to winning vote margin as opposed to percentage. I've done this in a lot of other regions or a lot of my other forecast videos as well, because I think the margin actually shows you more information than voting percentage. Because knowing that, for example, UCP's winning over here by, I can't think of the name of this writing, by more than 30% will tell you that it's not remotely at all close. Whereas if I said the UCP here was winning with 60% of the vote, well, that doesn't really tell you too much. Because, okay, they're winning with 60%. Is the other person at 40? Is the other person at 20? Saying they're winning by 30 means that it's not even close. Where this really comes in is, say here, in the center of Calgary. This riding, the NDP are only winning by less than 2 points. Whereas this riding over here, they're winning, or let's see with this one, they're winning by more than 10. However, these two ridings, they have very similar vote percentages. I think this is around 40 and this is around 50. Sorry for the... Anyways. If this was 40 and that was 50, that would make it look a lot closer than it is, whereas this is a competitive riding and this one not really. Similarly, right here and right here for the UCP, these have very similar UCP margins, or sorry, not margins, leads. Leads is the wrong word as well. Vote strength, this is again in the 50s and this is again around the 40s. Or this is high 40s, low 30s? I don't know, doesn't matter. They're very similar in actual vote share, but in lead, there's a very big difference. So I think I'm going to stick with this going forward, by winning vote margin methodology for coloring the map. So let me know if you hate this or if you think there's any problems with this, but otherwise I'm probably going to stick with this. So with that, what has changed since the first update? Well, Lethbridge West is no longer toss-up leaning NDP. Now it is, going UCP again. Some of the ridings in Calgary have changed a few. This one's a bit more competitive, and not really that interesting. Has happened in Calgary. It's pretty static. And in Edmonton, this riding here and this riding here have flipped UCP, but only by the tightest of margins. And it might very well be the case that is more anomalous than it is real. We will see going forward. We're not running with the most polls here. I think it's only actually been 2 full polls since the first episode in this series. That said, I don't actually expect... Actually, there's been 3 polls. I don't expect any other polls this month. We have 2 Ledger polls and we have 1 Angus Reid poll for this result here. I'm not expecting any more, so I don't really need to wait on this. But we're not one of the most polls here, but we do have a relatively flat trajectory here. So we see here, we bring out the changes since then. So this was when the first Ledger poll came out, Angus Reid poll came out, and when this Ledger poll came out. With the forecast date a couple of days in the future of when the last poll came out, just because it complicated model reasons, but this makes a better result. So since September 11th, we have generally UCP's up about 2 points, and the NDP is up about, let's say, 6.6. Overall, not too much movement, and we really shouldn't expect too much. It's not extremely clear as of this moment if Smith has had a meaningful impact on the UCP's numbers in and of itself. Removing Kenney definitely did. It's most notable, again, you see September 11th here, 7% for the Wild Rose Independence Party. Now it's down to 6%. That's a fairly significant jump here and is likely a large portion of the rebound the UCP's had, notably in Calgary. Not entirely from them in Calgary, but notable in Calgary. Similarly, the Alberta party's also lost some vote share, and other has lost vote share. I think it's not too surprising that those seem to be going towards mostly the UCP, because a lot of people who voted UCP in 2019 who were disaffected with Kenney's leadership over the pandemic seem to be coming home with a new leader. Now, there's been many people, and many pundits, and many media people suggesting that Smith is going to get trashed. She's too radical, her strategy's too crazy, she's pandering to the unvaccinated, or whatever. Her most recent quote-unquote scandal is... I don't know the exact phrasing of her statement, but apparently she has said things in the past regarding it before getting acclaimed leader of the UCP, or before the UCP leadership race, where she was skeptical about Western support for Ukraine. I don't know what she's actually said. All I've seen is people complaining about that she said something. I didn't look too hard because I don't really care, because it doesn't really matter. Because this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Let me say this once more time for people in the back of the room. It doesn't matter. Alberta is a province that will default to the Conservative Party. This is for many, many, many reasons. Western Canada is much more populist, for one. This is driven largely because Western Canada feels alienated from Eastern Canada, and they feel like Eastern Canada dominates them with elites from Eastern Canada telling them how to live their lives, which they have very little say over. So Western Canada tends to be much more populist. Alberta is a fairly rural province. It's not the most rural province, but it is fairly rural. And even those who do live in the cities are much more rural in attitude than, say, Ontario. It's not a huge difference, but it is a notable difference. Generally speaking, more rural areas, or areas that have a more rural culture, tend to be more conservative in a libertarian-esque sense. Rural areas tend to not want government interference. They can also be socially conservative, but that's not necessarily one lead to the other. It is generally the case that rural areas, or equally, more conservative areas are more religious, and more religious people tend to be more socially conservative. That is true. And that also affects some degree to Alberta, though not entirely. I don't know the exact religiosity numbers for Alberta off the top of my head, But I'm not sure if that's so much different than the rest of Canada. And then the final big factor that tends to cause Alberta to be more conservative than the rest of the country is oil. Oil is the big industry in Alberta. Eastern Canada tends to be anti-oil, and Eastern Canada tends to be left-wing. So a lot of left-wing parties, and this really hurts the NDP, Alberta, are heavily associated with Easterners who are perceived as elitist, which alienates the more populist bent to Alberta. And the Easterner liberal types want to kill the oil industry, which employs thousands of people and is pretty much the reason Alberta is a rich, prosperous province. And this alienates not just people who directly work in the industry, but also people who have friends in the industry or who just support the industry because they know it makes their lives better. Alberta has the lowest provincial tax rate, has 0 provincial sales tax, and generally speaking, maintains a quite high level of per capita spending on social services. Now, I know there's lots of people who don't like that, but if you are a centrist-y type person in Alberta and you like social services from the government and you think that they are a good thing, and you know that they are almost entirely paid for on the back of oil royalties, and you don't pay a lot of taxes because of these oil royalties, you are much more likely to be pro-oil industry and not want to support parties associated with destroying the prosperity that allows you to have highly funded services while paying very low taxes. Now, you could possibly argue that if the tax rates in Alberta were higher, they could have more funding or some such. But that's kind of besides the point, because people don't like higher taxes. So the ability to have low taxes and at least, the very least, comparable, in some cases possibly better services than the rest of the country is a very big argument. So all these things cause Alberta to tend to be more conservative. And then when you already have the tendency to be more conservative, that tends to pass to your children, your children's children, etc., etc. More conservative-minded folks are more likely to migrate to your place, and more liberal-minded folks are more inclined to migrate away from your province. That also causes Alberta to be more conservative than any other province in the country. Historically, other than 2015, where the Conservatives in Alberta were split, they haven't lost an election since the 30s? I think it's the 30s. 80 years. The Conservative parties have changed flavor. You had Social Credit, which was a populist Conservative party. You had the Progressive Conservatives, which was a more establishment-y Conservative party. Then you had the Wild Rose Progressive Conservative split, which was the establishment-y versus the populist-y types. And now you have the UCP, which is trying to merge those two together again. Lo and behold, and then you have the Conservatives before the Social Credit too. It changes. The party changes, the exact format changes, but the conservative-leaning party always wins. Except 2015, when you had the populists and the establishmentarians divided and disagree. I would argue, as a political forecaster and mild Canadian political pundit, that the reason 2015 lost is because the conservative establishment in Alberta lost the populists. Canada's conservatives physically cannot win an election alienating the populace. Populism, especially out west, is a very powerful force in Canada. The Conservative Party the Conservative factions have always been much more concerned about grassroots supporters, grassroots voters, and listening to their concerns. 2015, they didn't do that. So this cycles back to now. Why is it that Smith is... anyone doom-saying Smith is just full of it? Smith is a populist conservative. Some argue she's more libertarian than conservative, and I would be inclined to agree there. There is differences there, but in Canada's terms, they're not particularly relevant because social conservatism never actually ever gets pushed anywhere. So the difference between a social conservative who doesn't do anything socially conservative and a libertarian are pretty academic. At least, I would be shocked if you see someone like Smith pushing for any social liberal policy, period. And in that regard, a libertarian who doesn't do anything social liberal, is that really libertarian? But anyways, I digress. The things she has done since becoming leader might seem like they're a bad plan. They're going to alienate NDP voters. They're going to alienate the center. Blah, 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 blah. That doesn't matter. Full stop. It literally doesn't matter. This is a province where the Conservatives can sleepwalk to a majority win in popular vote terms. They don't need to pander to NDP voters. They don't need to pander to centrists. They need to pander to Conservatives because they will sleepwalk to a win regardless. The only thing that matters is if the Conservative voters like the Conservative Party in Alberta. Smith going on and talking about how the unvaccinated were discriminated against and wanting the Alberta Sovereignty Act, as naming two things, will, objectively speaking, solidify her populist credentials to the base and will speak to a concern that a large portion of the Conservative base has, and those are the people that matter. The populist side of the Conservatives in Alberta are the ones who will leave the party. The establishmentarians will almost never leave because the establishmentarians are the people who like small government. They like oil production because it makes them rich, and they like good economic controls or a good economic environment, a prosperous province. The NDP hates all of those things, either directly or indirectly. The NDP hates oil production, the NDP hates small government, and the NDP wants to do a bunch of policies that should make the province less prosperous. Namely, they want to put more regulations and more government intervention, and government intervention and regulations in general hurt the economy. Now, I will not blanket tell you that you should never have any regulations in an economy. Sometimes they are necessary. But in general terms, the ones that are necessary, we already have. So, the establishmentary Conservatives will almost certainly never, at least in meaningful quantities, desert Smith, regardless of what she does, unless she does something so wild as to be unconscionable. And frankly, I don't even know what that could be. The only thing I could think of is, like, walking down the street and... No, that's a bad example. Like, an actual thing maybe would be doing a hard pivot to be a SoCon. Then maybe she might scare the establishment types. But she's not a SoCon. She's never been a SoCon. So I can't possibly imagine why she would suddenly now, after 50 years of her life, hard to pivot to a position she's never argued for or had. So, that's just nonsense. Like, I can't think of anything I could reasonably see her doing that would scare enough centrists to matter. And in that regard, centrist is not a wrong word, enough establishment types to matter. So in that regard, pandering to the populist wing is literally how you win the election in Alberta. The establishment types will vote for you, probably regardless, because the NDP is in Alberta is so heavily dragged down by the terrible brand recognition caused by the federal party that they can't do anything to escape that unless they rename the party and officially break off with the federal party. Because it could be the case that maybe Notley and her next government don't actually want to be hostile to oil. They don't want to wildly increase the size of government. Maybe they don't want to do those things. But the federal party hates the oil industry and wants to make the government wildly larger. So that drags down the provincial brand heavily. In fact, I would go so far as to say that they can't really get more than 40-41% of the vote. That's their ceiling. That's the top. They can't go more than that. So the only way they can win is if the populists in Alberta stop voting. And we pop over here, we look at here, Wild Rose Independence Party, which is almost entirely populist in nature, is at 5.8%, and the UCP's at 48.2%. Well, look at that. That is almost exactly combined what they got in 2019. Almost all of the ground they have lost since 2019 has been the populists leaving the party. And you look at by regional, other than the rest of Alberta, so the rural parts of Alberta, their losses in Calgary are entirely explained by losing the Wild Rose, and apparently they gained ground in Edmonton. That one I can't explain to you, but the polls are the polls. But in the rest of Alberta, most of their losses are Wild Rose, and it appears they have lost some to the NDP. Some, an inconsequential amount, because winning with a plus 40 margin, or if they had the rest of Wild Rose in the fold, a plus 45 margin, is more than enough to win almost every seat except 2. And in fact, I'm pretty sure the NDP won this one in 2019 anyways. And they might have won this one too. I need to check this now. Wait, actually, no, I can... I have it here. I should have it here. Seat trend. Yeah, no, so... They won one of those two. I don't recall which one. In 2019. So... all of this about Smith alienating people is nonsense, or her campaign strategy being bad is nonsense, because the way the UCP wins is by keeping the populists on the train. Like, we're talking about a car convoy. Well, that's a bad example. We're talking about a truck here, right? And the way you win, you make money as a trucker is you take your trailer and you bring it to the destination. If your trailer falls off, doesn't matter, you get to the destination, you lost the trailer. That's your only purpose. The only way the UCP will win an election is if it keeps the populists on board. That's all that matters. And a lot of pundits and a lot of quote-unquote conservatives, you might see on Twitter, are going on about how Smith is alienating the party. She should be arguing more towards the NDP or the centrists. That's nonsense. That's stupid. That's the dumbest thing in the world. I'm sorry. The odds that the conservatives will take a meaningful amount of voters from the NDP is insane. Especially considering, I haven't talked about it much, Notley is reasonably competent and reasonably popular. So, a reasonably competent and reasonably popular NDP leader is not going to lose many NDP voters. It's not going to happen. Especially considering, if we go back to popular votes here, the Liberals are losing ground from last year. They didn't have much, to be honest. The Alberta Party, which is the centrist party, is losing more ground. So, two of the parties that could potentially vote split with the NDP are losing ground. And yes, I think it's reasonable to say the Alberta Party voters could probably also vote UCP. But when you're talking about winning an election, this is going to sound very cynical, but you don't need 63% of the vote. You're not going to get that. Like, yes, it would be great if you could win an election by getting 100% of people to vote for you. But the reality is, you will never get that. If you try to create a platform that will appeal to literal socialists, literal ANCAPs, and literal fascists at the same time, you won't get those people. You can't get all three groups. It's impossible. Or we go for less extreme positions. You want social democrats and you want SOCONs. You can't get that. You can't get a socially liberal person, like a very socially liberal person and a very socially conservative person, to vote for the same party unless their vote is about one thing in particular. For example, in Quebec, you can get people like that to vote for the Liberal Party or, say, the Parti Québécois historically, because the vote wasn't about social liberalism, social conservatism, fiscal liberalism, whatever. The vote was about, should Quebec leave? If you have one thing dominating the ballot, you can get diverse people together. But wait, you have one thing on the ballot, so there's a yes and no position. You're not going to get the people who say no. Same with Brexit, for example, in the UK. It's impossible to create a party that would have the pro-Brexit and the anti-Brexit people together. They fundamentally disagree on Brexit. You can't get everybody. It's literally impossible. The only way that can happen is if you are in a dictatorship. Or you are in a sort of fake democracy kind of thing where you can vote for Smith or you can vote for nobody. And if you vote for nobody, the secret police will go to your house and ask you why. You're not going to get that. It's not going to happen. And it shouldn't happen, frankly, because I don't want a Canada where we have secret police investigating why you didn't vote for the leader. That's called bad. So the idea that Smith, who's inheriting a position that should win by default, should pander to people who likely will never vote for her, ever, it's insane. You see people talk about this all the time because you'll see bad polls in Alberta. And yes, I am throwing shit at you, Ledger. You suck at polling Alberta. You are good in general, but your Alberta numbers are always off. I think your panel has too many people from Calgary and Edmonton, not enough from rural Alberta in it. Because even federally, you have Alberta much closer than it is. So, yes, the Ledger polls are showing the races, the NDP's favored to win the popular vote. Bullshit. It's not happening. It won't happen. Smith is at 48%. Nolly's at 38%. And it's going to be roughly like that, probably. Mark my words on this. I don't think the vote intention is going to wildly change until even... It won't change by May. It's going to probably be roughly around this, plus or minus a few percent. Barring Smith doing something crazy, the NDP officially divorcing itself from the Federal Party, or the Wild Rose Party, Independence Party, being like, we're out. We like Smith. But wait a minute, if the Wild Rose Party taps out and they say we like Smith, which is the only reason they're going to tap out, by the way. They're not going to tap out because we like Notley. No, they're populist rural conservatives. Largely. So, no, they tap out because they like Notley. Okay. Sorry. Because they like Smith. Okay. Well, then they would vote for Smith. And then Smith's going to get about 54%, which is roughly what Kenny did. That's the thing I'm really trying to press upon this here. The default position right now in Alberta, in the Alberta political sphere, is the UCP should get 54% minus splinter parties. By default, the UCP should win every single election without trying. Minus splinter parties. Literally, the only thing Smith needs to do is stop splinter parties. And you might be like, but you're only catering to the conservative part of the electorate. That's not fair. That's not democratic. It's literally the majority of Alberta. It's 54%. And I would argue probably some of these Alberta Party members are sympathetic as well, and probably some of these other voters are sympathetic. So you could even argue it might be 60% of the electorate is sympathetic towards default conservative governance. So the idea here that Smith has to do anything different, that her train is not the correct train, is insane. You might disagree with her methods, you might disagree with her words, but her strategy is the winning strategy. The media is going to flip out, and the only thing that might hurt her here is if she caves to the media or looks weak. That's bad. But as long as she keeps her spine and keeps defending the position she holds, such as the vaccine mandates were bad and that the unvaccinated were discriminated, she keeps holding things like that, she should rally almost the entirety of the populist base in Alberta to her. And if she has almost the entirety of the populist base in Alberta, she's almost certainly going to win. And she might very well win with a similar percentage of the vote that Kenney did. And it's extremely unlikely that the establishment conservatives will abandon the party because Smith is the default choice for them. No other premier candidate is guaranteed to fight for oil, resist making the government bigger, and not introduce more regulations. And in fact, wait a minute, Smith, she's a libertarian, right? Oh wait, libertarians hate big government, they hate regulations, and they love oil. Wait a minute. Doesn't this mean that her default political orthodoxy, that everyone is saying she is the very thing that the establishment in Alberta would want? Wait, oh my god, it's almost like she's actually a good candidate for this election. And as long as she continues her train, she's going to win. And as long as she doesn't listen to the stupid media pundits online, the media types who want to see her lose, the discontent voices in her caucus who don't like what she's doing, as long as she stays on her train, buckles up, and just keeps chugging along, she's going to win. There's all this nonsense about this is a close race. It's not a close race. It's not. This isn't close. This is going to be probably less competitive than Quebec was. Not because you're going to see the UCP winning with plus 26 margin like the CAQ did, but because there is no hope for the NDP. The NDP have a hard ceiling of 42, 43. They're not going to beat that. They literally have no path to victory as long as Smith keeps the party intact. And historically, the establishment has never divorced itself. It's always been the populist wing. Same thing federally. The Progressive Conservative Party federally, the establishment didn't break off and form a new party. The populists seceded and formed the Reform Party. And recently, in 2017, the Conservative Party establishment didn't break off and make a new party. It was the populist wing, with Maxime Bernier, who seceded and made the PPC. However, in that particular case, since no one else deserted with Bernier, it never really went anywhere yet. That's how it's always going to be in Canada. The establishment conservatives are probably always going to vote for you. Same thing in the US too, by the way. These people will talk about, there's the Lincoln Project, or there's this and this. No, the established Republicans are going to vote for the MAGA guy just as much as anyone else. But the MAGA people will probably not vote for the establishment dude. It's common sense here. Stuff like this just irks me so much because everyone commenting on this so much just doesn't understand the mindset that is modern conservatism, especially in Canada. People don't understand how the party works, how the coalition works, how you win an election with this coalition. They don't understand. It's simple. You be a conservative, you're going to win the establishment, probably by default. Then you say things that are populisty, and action things that are populisty, and you win the populist, and then you win the election. Every conservative government in Canada has done something like that, unless their opponents were hopelessly vote splitted. You could argue, perhaps, 2018 and 2022 in Ontario, Ford wasn't, I won't say 2018, sorry, 2022 in Ontario, Ford wasn't particularly populist. Dean didn't really do anything populisty. In fact, maybe the opposite of populist. But his opposition was so hopelessly split it didn't matter. But anywhere else, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I challenge you to find many examples of a conservative faction winning in a province that didn't say conservative things to appease the establishment and didn't do populist things to appease the populists. It needs to do both, and it has to be real things. If they're not real things, the voters stay home or they make a new party. That was the risk in Alberta. That's why it wasn't implausible that Kenney might have lost the popular vote. He's probably going to win the election, by the way, but he might have lost the popular vote because he might have had some polls set up to 10-15% of the Wild Rose, the Wild Rose Party is going to take 10 to 15% of his voters. I will put here before I just finish up here. 10 to 15%, and if Notley gained 4 or 5, well, the UCP still has a popular vote lead. But even if the UCP doesn't have a popular vote lead, they're still going to win because of voter efficiency, right? So that's the other thing, right? The UCP basically can't lose this because the Wild Rose Party is in rural Alberta. Unless they're polling in 20-30% range, they're not going to win any meaningful number of ridings in rural Alberta. All of these ridings, their UCP's like 50-60%, and the NDP's closer to 20-30. So if the Wild Rose Party, as at best polling, was 15%, the closest riding in rural Alberta is this one, in Lethbridge West. Which, Lethbridge West is arguably not the place where the Wild Rose Party is going to be really strong, and probably not Slave Lake either. But even if we gave it the benefit of the doubt there, and that those were the places where they were the strongest, oh great, the vote splitting caused the NDP to pick up 2 seats? Whoop-de-dingle-do? Or, okay, maybe for some reason the Wild Rose Party is really popular in Edmonton and Calgary. They're probably not going to be very popular in Edmonton and Calgary in reality, but let's say they were. Okay, the NDP picks up 1, 2, 3. They picked up 5 seats. They're now at 34. TCB's 53. That's not a win, boss. That's not a win. So, I guess I'll try to wrap this up. This got a bit longer because I'm kind of ranting here. But the mainstream media, a lot of quote-unquote conservative pundits, and just general people on the internet are all dumb. They don't understand one iota of Alberta. I'm not even from Alberta, and I understand Alberta better than people who are from Alberta because they're stupid. And they don't understand conservatism, or the conservative factions anywhere, or what motivates conservative voters. Should we be surprised, though? Because a lot of the media people, by polling, are left-wing, so of course they don't understand conservatives. They're not conservatives. And a lot of these online conservative pundits are morons. So of course they don't understand conservatives, because conservatives are not morons and they are morons. And just to be clear here, I'm not saying Liberal voters or NDP voters are morons. They're not these conservative pundits that don't understand how Smith is going to win the election easily. And if I'm wrong, maybe I'm the moron, but it's not going to happen. I'm sorry, it won't. It won't happen. And in fact, I will just bring up. Let's look at the polls in the last Alberta general election. Are you ready for this? Oh my god, look. All the polls say it was a lot closer than it actually was. The NDP was being overstated by like 4 to 6 points. And the Conservatives were being underestimated by like 5 to 10 points. Oh my god. Oh, and look here. There's Ledger. They were off by 8 points. Huh. It's almost like Ledger's panel isn't very good in Alberta. This is, by the way, Ledger's worst performance in recent memory. But their 2021 election polling for Alberta wasn't very good either. Not saying Ledger's bad. I'm saying they need to look at their numbers for Alberta. They're not very good in Alberta. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that the polls in Alberta reliably underestimate the Conservatives, and this isn't the first election to do it, by the way. And voting efficiency is in favor of the Conservatives, and the base of the Conservative Party is going to vote Conservative anyways, except the populists, who Smith is aptly and smartly courting. So, what do we have here? Let's just carry the two. Oh yeah, the Conservatives are going to win. Duh. And with that, I bid you adieu. If you liked the video, please like, share, subscribe. Comment below if you think this was too petty or too much of a rant. If you liked this, equally comment below and let me know. I can't say every video will be as sharp as this one, because I have to have the reason to be sharp. But if you like videos like this, I will make sure to not do them. If you hate videos like this, I will steer away from this. Otherwise, I bid you adieu, and I will see you on Thursday with another U.S. Senate one. I am hoping to add more states, but we will see if I have time.